Daisy was determined to have the last word to win the argument and prove her point, unaware of the impact her words would have. Then she said it. "You argue too much for a man. No wonder you're so small down there." The moment those words left her mouth, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The tension that had been building throughout the argument didn't explode. It collapsed into a heavy silence. Raymond didn't react with anger, didn't fire back an insult, and didn't raise his voice. He simply stood still, frozen, his jaw tightening, his hands subtly clenching, and his eyes darkening with something deeper than rage. It was hurt. It was humiliation. It was a wound she had unknowingly torn open. Without uttering a word, he turned and walked away. Daisy stood there expecting him to return with more shouting, to continue the fight as he always had. But this time he didn't. The silence that followed was worse than any angry response he could have given. In most relationships, arguments involve yelling, maybe some storming off, but eventually the couple comes back together. That's the rhythm Daisy had always known in her marriage to Raymond. Their conflicts weren't perfect, but there was always a return to each other. Yet this time, there was no return. That night, Raymond didn't come back to their bedroom. At first, Daisy thought he just needed some space. Perhaps he'd cool off and slip back into bed later, or maybe things would feel normal by morning. But when she reached for him the next day, his side of the bed remained untouched. A sense of unease slowly settled in her chest. This wasn't like him. No matter how bad their arguments had been in the past, he'd always been there, even if it was just in body. She got out of bed and searched the house, expecting to find him in the kitchen or on the couch. Instead, she found him in the guest room, sitting at the edge of the bed, withdrawn. He wasn't sulking. He wasn't angry. He was just empty. Daisy hesitated in the doorway, waiting for him to say something, but he stayed silent. She spoke first. "Raymond, why are you sleeping in here?" But he didn't answer. She pressed on, asking if he was still angry, if he was planning to come back to bed. He barely looked at her, and when he did speak, his voice was calm, almost distant. It wasn't anger or a plea for understanding. It was just silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that spoke louder than any words could. Days passed, but nothing changed. At first, Daisy told herself that he just needed time, that things would go back to normal, but they didn't. Raymond withdrew completely. If she entered a room, he left. If she tried to speak to him, he barely acknowledged her. If she reached out to touch him, he pulled away. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, something final. It was as though he had erased her from his world without a single word. Desperate to fix things, Daisy resorted to the only way she knew how, through food. She cooked his favorite meals, hoping the comfort of home-cooked dishes might soften him, but he barely touched his plate. She left small notes, made little gestures of apology, trying to communicate her regret in actions instead of words, but none of it reached him. And for the first time, Daisy realized that this wasn't just another fight. It was something much more profound, something broken beyond repair. She tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but it didn't even elicit a smile. She reached for his hand, brushing her fingers against his, but he stiffened at her touch. Nothing worked. That was when the chilling realization hit her. For years, she had believed that arguing meant there was still something worth fighting for. As long as they were shouting, they still cared. But now the silence between them felt heavier than any shouting match. It was emptiness, and that emptiness felt like something between them had already died. Daisy hadn't understood that her words didn't just sting in the moment. They'd reopened a deep, old wound. One Raymond had spent years trying to forget. Raymond had always been insecure about his size, though he never spoke of it, not even with his closest friends. In high school, he had been teased and ridiculed, and rumors spread about him. False rumors that started with a careless conversation in the locker room, but quickly became something much bigger. He still remembered the look on the face of the girl he had a crush on when she heard the rumors. It wasn't anger or pity, just indifference, as if it had ceased to exist in her eyes. That moment haunted him into adulthood, no matter how hard he tried to bury it. His last serious relationship had ended in the most painful way. He walked in on his girlfriend with another man, and when he demanded an explanation, she didn't cry, didn't beg for forgiveness. She simply shrugged and said, "You just don't satisfy me." That was the moment that broke him. After that, he locked away all his pain, never letting anyone get close enough to see the vulnerability beneath the surface. He had worked hard to rebuild his confidence, convincing himself that he had moved on. Then he met Daisy, and everything felt different with her. He didn't feel small or insignificant. He didn't feel the need to prove himself. He felt safe, loved, as though she saw him for who he truly was. For the first time in a long time, he thought he had truly left his past behind. But then that night came. The argument cut deeper than he could have imagined. You argue so much for someone who's barely a man. No wonder you're so tiny down there. Just one sentence. And everything he had built started to fall apart. It sent him spiraling back to the old pain, the humiliation, the betrayal, the shame. Only this time it wasn't from a stranger or an unfaithful ex. It was from Daisy, the one person he thought would never hurt him like that. For the first time since they'd been together, he didn't know how to look at her anymore. Daisy, for a part, hoped things would get better with time. She waited, but instead of growing closer, he kept pulling away, determined to fix things. One evening, she went to the guest room where he had been staying, expecting to find him distracted with his phone. What she found was an empty room. The shower was on and his phone lay on the bed, its screen still lit. She hesitated. She had never been the type to invade his privacy, but something caught her attention. An email notification. The subject line read, "Regarding divorce proceedings." Her breath caught in her chest. Divorce? It couldn't be. It had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. This wasn't just about the argument. It wasn't just that one cruel remark. Raymond wasn't just angry. He was planning to leave her. When he stepped out of the bathroom, she was already waiting for him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Are you really thinking about divorcing me over one argument?" Her voice was barely a whisper. For the first time in weeks, he looked at her, but there was no anger in his eyes, no sadness, just emptiness. When he finally spoke, his voice was disturbingly calm. "You think this is just about that night?" That was when she understood. It wasn't just the insult. It was everything. The fights they had left unresolved. The distance growing between them. The wounds they had ignored for far too long. That night had been the tipping point. But the cracks in their relationship had been there for a while. Desperate, Daisy did everything she could to fix things. She apologized again and again, not just with words, but through actions. She made his favorite meals, left him notes, tried to engage him in conversation about anything, the weather, his day, their memories. But his responses were always the same. Short, disinterested, distant, and that was the worst part. She could feel that he already knew the answer to the question she was too afraid to ask. Did he still want to stay? His silence spoke volumes. Daisy had always believed that regret was something that could be fixed, that as long as you were willing to try, any mistake could be undone. But this was different. This wasn't something an apology could erase. This was a wound that ran too deep. One evening, as she passed the guest room, she stopped short. Raymond was packing a suitcase. His clothes were neatly folded inside. Panic gripped her, and before she could stop herself, she stepped into the room, her voice trembling. "Are you really leaving?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally turned to face her, his voice was steady but heavy with truth. "I don't know if I can get past this." The words hit her harder than anything he had ever said. She had expected anger, resentment, maybe even shouting. But this calm uncertainty was worse than any outburst. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't care about pride anymore. "I love you," she choked out. "I messed up. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. Just tell me what to do." For the first time in weeks, something flickered across his face. Hesitation, conflict, something more than the emptiness she had come to expect. He was silent for a long time before he finally spoke. "You can't take back what you said, and I can't unhear it." Her heart sank, but then he added, "But maybe I don't want to walk away. Not yet." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise. But it was something, and for Daisy, That was all she had left to hold on to. Raymond didn't leave that night, but the damage was done. The road to healing would be long, and Daisy knew that some wounds wouldn't fade quickly. The real question was whether their love could survive.